What's up, folks? Max here, back from Comic-Con and making some video impressions on some of the games I had a chance to play, and one that I think a lot of you would like to know more about, and it's the Legend of Korra game that's being made by Platinum Games and published by Activision. This was announced about a month and a half, near 2 months ago, and came completely out of left field when we found out about it. Not only did I think a game like this could ever exist, I didn't think they would do anything with the license beyond it, but I do think the Avatar universe to actually do something with like all the different bending and all that stuff would be really exciting and really damn cool, and kind of an interesting structure to make future games. Even though the future of the show is a little weird after the Comic-Con announcement that it's going digital, it doesn't mean that the game lacks polish and quality, and that's what we really want to talk about right now, since I missed the opportunity to make a few videos within the last month or so talking about my excitement for the game. Now I have direct feedback on how the game plays, how it looks, how it feels, and the future of it, because I got to talk to the developers, and I got about 2.5 hours of playtime with the new Legend of Korra, so let's get started. The number one thing you're going to notice is that the visual style of Korra really represents the show. I got the big feeling that they want this game to look as much like the show and as fluid as possible. And if we're talking about fluidity, yes, it does run a rock-solid 60 frames per second, but when it comes to very nuanced details that aren't things like animation, like really high quality textures in some regards and a lot of detail to the environments look great. They suit their purpose, there's nothing specifically wrong with them, but they're not extremely next gen, if you get what I mean. The game is being designed for multi-platforms, including previous generation like PS3 and Xbox 360, so that the game can most likely run at decent frame rates on everything. It runs extremely well, it looks very good, and the game hits where it needs to hit, which is in the quality of animations and attacks. And that's the most important part. The effects behind the bending, how Korra moves, the animation transitions are absolutely top freaking notch, and handled with a level of care that you would expect from a company like Platinum Games. Many of you guys might not know this, but I absolutely love Platinum Games. I love action games, their combat systems, and they're really similar to fighting games in a lot of the ways. You crack them open, you figure things out, and you come up with the most ridiculously awesome stuff. It's one of my favorite things in games to have your character just look absolutely crazy amazing, doing some of the coolest stuff you possibly can, and you absolutely get that chance with Legend of Korra. The biggest worry I had jumping into this game is that it might be a toned-down version of a Platinum Games title. Some of these games can be notoriously difficult on harder difficulties, and getting into them and trying to figure them out, there's a lot of hidden nuance within Platinum Games titles, and that is absolutely present with The Legend of Korra. Not only within the first 30 minutes was I discovering things that obviously was not on the basic control scheme menu, it was stuff that you would not figure out unless you kind of knew action games. And if you press a lot of buttons and you see cool stuff happen, you might see it every once in a while, but you might not realize what you did. For perspective on how the controller layout is and how the action works, you get a light attack, you get a heavy attack, you get a jump, which is all the face buttons of the controller, and circle, I believe, if you double tapped it, you get a taunt. You also get a dodge, you also get that dodge that works in the air as well, and you get a guard. But if you press the guard at certain points right as the enemy attacks you, a la Metal Gear Rising, you will get a counter move that pretty much one-hit KOs every single regular enemy that isn't a boss. It's a little overpowered. The only problem with the counter is that it's a little bit easier to pull off than something like Rising, because Rising you had to face that direction towards the enemy, and you also had to hit a button along with it. In Korra, it's a lot simpler, it's a lot easier to get counters in some regards, but you do have a normal block, which is not prevalent in a lot of Platinum games. You do have a regular block button in this game, and normally you can do things by just blocking attacks, but I found myself going for counters and dodging most of the time, especially since you have an air dodge. It seems like it can be a little abusable because you can kind of dodge everything, it feels like, but the developers did realize this, and if you dodge like 3 or 4 consecutive times in a row, the last dodge gives you a huge amount of recovery, and she does this giant flip. Now, if we want to talk about attacking, this is where a lot of the gameplay systems come into effect. One of the things I was looking for first was, of course, a lock-on button, and the lock-on button is present in Korra. It is indeed L3, and it locks onto the opposition. When you get this, you don't get a crazy different type of like variety attacks. A lot of the times in most action games that come from Platinum, you lock onto the enemy, and as you're holding the lock-on button, you can press the attacks to get other moves. That isn't exactly here. You just use the lock-on to kind of focus the camera in one direction instead of manually controlling it, because the main resource of attacks is the square button and the triangle button for light attacks and heavy attacks, and you can also switch between bending abilities. And in our demo, we got a pretty good amount of abilities that were available in the game. I think they said it was about 1/3 of them, and there's still 2/3 that you're waiting to unlock, but we had all the bending elements. You can switch between any of the light and heavy attacks for all those bending elements, and not only do you get the light versions where you just tap the button, you can hold it down and charge it up, and when you charge it up, it gives you a huge move of that light or heavy attack, and that charging period leaves Korra completely unsafe, so a lot of the times you have to put them into a stun or a juggle state, and then launch this huge heavy attack at them. It feels very much like a Platinum Games title, especially previous like Devil May Cry stuff. I very much see that the different ways that the bending handles itself between fire, air, earth, and water, all these things are meant for certain different things, like one is good for close range, one's good for long range, and I could already see that you would go into like an arena or a battle zone and fight maybe 6 or 7 dudes and literally take out every single person by just moving left and right and commanding each form of bending, as long as you had the coordination to do so. There is going to be sick combo videos for this game when it comes down to it. But even though this sounds amazing, it sounds really cool, and I'm really impressed with what they were able to do, especially considering that it's a budget title that's going to be download only coming out this fall. It isn't exactly perfect. Some things do lack polish in some regards. You can block in the air, which returns Korra to the neutral standing position even in the air, so it looks a little weird, like she's kind of like standing on nothing. Even though she does do this with select attacks, if you press the dodge button twice, she gets this forward momentum version of any of the bending elements you're on. For example, she jumps on like the little air wind bubble and she flies forward. She illuminates her feet with fire and dashes forward really quick if you have the fire bending element, and other things like that with the others. There is little hidden things that they don't tell you in the menu and options, and there's a ton of other stuff that I was able to figure out while actually fighting opponents. You do have KO options. You can press circle to KO people. It's pretty cool, and it changes depending on which bending element you're on, so you get a nice amount of variety there. The biggest issue with a lot of cinematic elements in action games is that you see the same thing over and over and over again, and there is only one thing that seemed kind of prevalent in this game so far, and it's when you do actually get a counter on the opponent, you have to press both the analog sticks up almost in every regard, and she just does this giant thrust forward, and it pretty much KO'd everyone, like I said earlier. That I hope there's a little bit of variety. I hope you get at least 2 per bending element at some point, because when you get a counter, you feel really good, and you kind of want to be rewarded for it, and that's the only thing that kind of feels lacking right now. But some of the most fun I was having was actually fighting a lot of characters on screen at one time, and trying to figure out what to do and which person to attack, because some people are weak to certain elements, and you have to know that. You have to kind of figure out what this enemy is weak to. The problem is the camera, and as with action games, the camera is never perfect. Even in lock-on mode, the camera can be a little slow to follow and track where the lock-on is, and when you get into the corner, it just gets absolutely nuts. And the more I played, the more I was able to kind of figure out and kind of establish that this game is totally using the Metal Gear Rising camera. It acts very similar in corners, it acts very similar when barriers are put up or when you have to focus on one part of action or others, and I did give them a little bit of feedback that at times the camera needs to be pulled out a little bit, because you don't exactly get to see the amazing stuff that Korra's doing when you start to get juggle combos and you're jumping into the air and doing all these things like that. I would like to see a little bit wider of a view, but in general, I'm excited about this game. I always thought that this universe could be really, really awesome for an action game, and never in a million years did I think that somebody like Platinum, or even the guys at Activision and the guys that are making this game, would go to somebody like Platinum. It seems like the greatest idea ever, and that usually it would never happen because it's such a great idea, but it actually happened, so extremely pleased with it. I was very impressed with the demo. I'm still thinking about it right now. I still want to play more, and for any of you folks that might have been worried that the game is going to be kind of like a rush job or anything like that, it's definitely made with care, and it's played with care at the same time, and if you're a fan of the show, you're absolutely going to love it. Honestly, it's one of those things where it's very obviously made for the fans of the Korra show and the entire Avatar universe, and I see this, that if something like this is actually successful, they have a pretty amazing groundwork for a potential big title coming up later on if it is successful, or they can even do something with the original season of Avatar where they can have like the Aang Chronicles. That'd be freaking awesome, and right now they already have a foundation that works pretty dang well. If you guys enjoyed the video, I appreciate your feedback. As soon as we get more information, I'll be having more breakdowns breakdowns about the combat of Korra the closer it comes out to its debut, and I'll be covering the game especially during our live streams and on Yo Video Games, because it's just a lot of fun to play. As always, folks, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy fighting game coverage or action game coverage of any kind, I encourage you to subscribe, and I'll be back as soon as possible. My name is Maximilian, and I'll see you next time.